probably the reason why God picked on me is because I went through a whole battle of depression. It's just amazing how He'll take you through something so that He can use it for your glory.
Right.
And so basically, I worked on a psychiatric unit for probably, well, I worked in psychiatric services probably close to 20-some years. And so when God removed me from that and sent me over to Lakewood, basically I began to do the trainings regarding depression, regarding suicide. So I was like, okay, God, if you want me to do this, I said, you're going to just have to make it all plain to me. How many of y'all believe He made it plain?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm sorry for asking. But anyway, He did make it plain to me. And so I just want y'all to know that we're about to enter one of the most critical seasons of depression and suicide, because the holidays are very exciting. They're very happy for most people, but for a lot of people, it's very painful. And so how do we handle all of this depression that we have going on? One thing I can truly tell you is no one in the family really wants to talk about Aunt Jane, who acts a little Lulu, and no one wants to talk about Uncle Vernon, who does all these weird things. Well, I had that in my family, and I didn't understand when I was younger why we couldn't visit this one, or if we went over there, strange things were happening. And so I know we all can relate. But one thing I did learn when I was in school is that it's very hard for African Americans to seek help. Why do y'all think that's the case?
Because what's said in the house stays in the house.
That's one reason.
Because they don't know how to open up. They think that they should conceal things.
Very true. We deal with a lot of shame, and there is a big stigma that's attached to mental illness. You know, people say, oh, that person is crazy, or, you know, they don't want to deal with that person. I had an uncle who really kind of started me in this journey, because when I was in the 9th grade, I was working in a program, and I was placed at a facility for outpatient psychiatric people. And my uncle would be there, so he called me Little Chris. So all day long, I got to hear him call my name and say different things to me, but I was really the only one who could handle him. So I was like, how do you manage to do what you're doing? So then I realized that this must be my gifting from the Lord, because that's exactly where He kept me for so many years. So I want to kind of tell you all that when you are depressed, what are some of the feelings you start having?
Withdrawal.
Anger.
Okay, give me some before that. Someone said anger.
Lack of interest.
Lack of interest.
Basically joy.
Right, and you said withdrawn.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sad.
at that time. Sad. Okay. When do you feel that you're really, really in trouble?
When you don't want to eat no more.
When you don't want to eat anymore?
You want to be around anybody.
Live,
You don't
yeah.
want to live anymore?
You want to be to yourself.
Want to be to
Isolated.
yourself. And they call that, you lose a desire for what they call activities of daily living, because all of us get up and we go through our
Right.
process of getting dressed. Now, when I was depressed, I'm the type of person, you know, like everyone else, I love shopping. But when I was depressed, y'all should have seen me. I was a holy mess. As a matter of fact, one of my girlfriends, I think about a month ago, she said, Chris, I know you're not going to believe this. She said, but this was you many, many years ago. I said, girl, stop. You need to tear it up right now. You're not posted on Facebook. Don't go there. But I'm telling you, I lost a desire to keep my hygiene up. And I couldn't believe the person that I was actually becoming. I mean, it was just really, really scary, because it happened like all at once. You know, I just had this real bad feeling. Well, let me tell you what I just recently found out. I had breakfast with my aunt telling me about these family secrets. There was a history of bipolar disorder in my family. There was a history of schizophrenia in my family. There was a history of depression in my family. And I'm like, well, I just will be. No one told me anything. You know, I got depressed, and I was just thinking that, you know, this just happened. No, it didn't just happen, because I found out that depression could be genetic, meaning that, you know, you can be passed on from the genes. And so basically, I had breakfast with my aunt this week, and she began to tell me, she said, my grandmother, whom I truly, truly love, my paternal grandmother on my father's side, that she took medications for for depression. She said, you know, that was time when mom just couldn't handle things, and so I think right now they probably call that medicine Xanax. So naturally I wanted to just choke her. I'm like, you just not telling me the story? And I went through all of this and no one said anything.
Right, right.
So I was watching a show, I think it was The View, and Taraji P. Henson was on there. And so she lost her father 2 years after her husband was murdered. And so she has one child and he's a son. And so what she began to say is that when she wanted to take her son for therapy, there was no one who looked like him. No African American counselors or therapists, and no Christian counseling that he could get. So she started a program that an organization, I guess, for people who are going to be in crisis or whatever. But what I can tell you is there's a certain way that your brain looks when you're depressed, and I'm gonna pass this around. This part right here is a depressed brain. You see it's blue? I never even knew that your brain, there's chemical endorphins in your brain, and so that's why they always tell you to exercise, so that you can stimulate your body, stimulate yourself. And so you notice how good you feel after you get that major workout? Well, this is probably how your brain looks because you're not depressed. And so you see the yellow. On this side, when they say I'm not blue, so it really does turn blue in the inside of your brain when you're depressed. And I found that very interesting when I was doing my research for Lakewood. I'm gonna pass this around later. There's a young lady on here who was actually my student when I was teaching. She had a horrible, horrible journey through depression, but God delivered her.
Come on.
And brought her through her journey. So now she pretty much does a lot of work in the Hispanic community. But Graciela was a top of the line student, and so was I. You know, I was just over the top. But what I learned was usually people who suffer with bipolar disorder are very, very smart, very talented people. You know, we have actors and actresses and all of them. You have Kanye West. We all know something is terribly wrong with Kanye. But, and I think he's finally gotten to the point where he can admit what's going on with him. So there's a major depression inventory that I have on here. And so when you start looking at these questions like, it says, the psychiatrist will ask you, well, how long have you been depressed? So you begin to answer all these questions. And so while you're telling him that or her that, then they're checking off on their little checklist. And so, and then they come up with what they call the DSM, which is a diagnostic manual. And it comes up with your diagnosis. And that's how they know what medications to give you and how to treat you. So I also wanted to find encouraging things for depression. There's 10 encouragement. These are biblical scriptures and different sayings are in here. There's an organization called NAMI, and they're the National Alliance for Mentally Ill. And what they do is they work with the family members. So when we had patients who came on the psychiatric unit, our goal was to educate the patient as much as possible. But for their loved ones, we would refer them to NAMI. So I have their brochure is on here. And there's also some information on here for scriptures regarding comfort in the Bible, different things. Different resources are on here front and back. And what I want to tell you is when your depression goes so far, I think beyond like 2 weeks, you're heading into like the 3rd week, then you can become what we call suicidal. So at that point, you've lost your desire to live. But one thing I can tell you about suicide people, they're very impulsive. I just read an article where there was a young lady 12 years ago. Her mother suffered with depression and jumped off of a 4-story building holding her in her arms. She was a baby at the time. So guess what just happened? She became depressed and she just jumped off of a bridge. I think this was like the anniversary of her mother's death. And so what you want to try to do is if you have a friend or if you have a loved one, you want to try to intervene as soon as possible. You know, just kind of start asking, well, how long have you been feeling this way? If they start telling you it's been about 2 weeks and you're looking at how they were looking prior to all of these things happening, they're not eating, they're not sleeping, I would say you definitely want to try to encourage them to go and see someone. They're not going to agree at first because, you know me, I just really was like, you know, I can do this, but really I couldn't do that. And so I think it's the acceptance of what is going on with you. So most definitely you want to try to reach out and try to help them. There was an organization, and I brought the book. They came to Lakewood and they gave us information on the things that you should say to a depressed person. So their information is on here. It's called Self-Talk. But one thing I want you to know, if someone is telling you, I feel suicidal, one thing I always ask them is, do you have a plan? If they start telling me, yes, I have a bottle of pills at home and I really want to take this medication, then you really need to move. It's amazing to me how social media is so wonderful, but no one seems to move when they start seeing things on social media. They just read it, they do nothing about it. And you have to know that when a person gets that depressed to post it, I think the last one we just saw was where the gentleman drove all the way, he had a California license plate, he was in the service, and his girlfriend lived here in Houston. He drove all the way here, convinced her to leave her home with him. And we know the story, how he took her in the motel and killed himself, killed her first and then killed himself with the 4-year-old watching.
Wow.
We know now that if a 4-year-old witnessed that, it's gonna take a lot of time to get that child back on track. And so it's really, really, I have information on here for domestic violence, there's information on here for, I think, sexual assault. And now the new thing that's going on in Houston that kind of ties in with suicide and depression is these young girls are becoming so depressed at home, we're having to look at human trafficking. The director over the ministry that I'm in, he is now one of the appointed people by the governor, and he is working real hard with human trafficking. They kind of wanted me to get involved with that, and I said no. Number one, I have to know my limits. I hate when someone does something to a child. That's just always been, something that really is next to me, so I didn't feel like I could do it. So I just work in the areas where I feel more comfortable. So I'm gonna leave that to somebody else. And so, and that's what I learned in college. You find your niche and you stay with that. If it's something that you're uncomfortable with, you really shouldn't be that one because you're not gonna be objective. So I don't wanna take the whole floor. I could go on and on and on. So if you all look at the information, you have any questions about it, anything you wanna ask me about, if you want to pull me over in private, I'll be more than happy to talk to you. Any questions, any comments? Did I touch everything? No questions, no comments. Well, thank you all for listening.